Hey, it's 2.1, video 2. What is postmodernism? I like this image, pre-modern, because God put it there, and that's the way it's always been. It's like a little dot. Then we get to modernism, onwards and upwards with inevitable progress. We're only getting better. And postmodernism, a little bit what it's like. Let me tell you some more. Take a look at this piece of art. This is a painting by Jules Breton from 1868 called The Weeders. And in it, we see in the foreground, we're pretty close up on these women who are weeding, pulling weeds out by the root on their haunches, on their knees. And we've got someone in the background. Looks like we're towards the end of the day, right? She's got a bag full of weeds, looking out, maybe with some hope about the next day or life after, or something like that, as the sun sets. Well, this is a good example of realism in art, and I'll tell you why. Realism in art is the theory or practice of fidelity to nature, so being honest to nature, to how things are, and to accurate representation without idealization of the most typical views, details, and surroundings of the subject. And so realism is what it sounds like. It's telling the real story, not exaggerating at all, not making it look better than it is, worse than it is, etc. When we're looking at realism, we are using close observation over imaginative idealization, from a detached kind of viewpoint or objectivity or observation, like a journalist almost. There is some criticism of social norms and humane understanding, and that's mostly because the subject matter is no longer just the elite class, but rather the working class. And when we're writing in a realist manner, we're using everyday speech as the narrator and for the dialogue. This is genuine, unembellished humanity being described and portrayed. Like in Charles Dickens, he wrote A Christmas Carol, Tale of Two Cities, or in Mark Twain, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, or in the 20th century, we call it naturalism. Steinbeck was a naturalist and wrote Of Mice and Men in this style, very similar to realism, or a type of realism, along with Richard Wright's Native Son. Let's move on to modernism. And for modernism, we have this painting, Guernica by Pablo Picasso from 1937. And in this painting, it's a lot harder to describe what we're seeing. We're seeing multiple things happening at the same time. This cow, for example, looks on the one hand like it's staring, like we're looking at it straight on. On the other hand, it looks like we're looking at its profile, almost creating some movement within this cow's face as we look at the two-dimensional portrayal. Same thing here with this woman, maybe holding a baby. We're not quite sure, but there seems to be some different ways to look at what she's doing, what's happening here, Lots of movement within the two-dimensional figures and lots of different subjects. So let's take a look at what modernism is all about. Modernism describes a collection of cultural movements of the late 19th and early 20th century looking for better solutions. And this painting was in response to a war that was happening, and Picasso was, wanting to present the horror of the war so that people could respond, perhaps end it. Some aspects of modernism are, first of all, traditional values and institutions are seen as oppressive. They aren't helping. They're not working. Instead, they're holding us back. And there is reason and belief in human progress, but modernists noticed, because this was really after the First World War, and, at the time, the only world war, the Great War, it was called, where there was so much destruction on a scale that humanity had never seen before, that people were wondering, okay, where did we go wrong? Like, we can set this ship right, can't we? We just need to figure out how. And they were trying to free themselves from historical baggage, the problems of the past. They were looking at perceptual truths over reality, oftentimes, like in this painting, where, realistically these things aren't happening, but instead they create a perceptual truth of the carnage of war. In literature, this meant formalism over tradition, where the form of the piece that's being written or produced mirrors what it's about. Multiple narrators or narrative points of view. In this painting, we have multiple subjects, disjointed timelines where things aren't always happening from the beginning to the middle to the end, but we might be all over the place. A blending of genres, poetry, prose, maybe nonfiction and fiction. Stream of consciousness is big in writers in modernism. We're thinking of folks like this guy, Ernest Hemingway, or Virginia Woolf, the queen of stream of consciousness writing. Poets like T.S. Eliot and the French writer Albert Camus, who wrote The Stranger. Now, when we get to postmodernism, I've got this piece of artwork. This is the Maryland Diptych by Andy Warhol, made in 1962. It's a screen print, and Warhol screen printed Marilyn Monroe's face over and over and over and over again. On this side, we see the bright colors, maybe reminding us of her sort of beyond realistic celebrity status. And then on this side, it's black and white, maybe reminding us of the downfall of fame. But at any rate, this is a good example of postmodernism for a lot of reasons. Let's take a look at the definition first. Postmodernism works rejects the idea of absolute meaning and instead embrace randomness and disorder. So you can see that here, the embracing of random disorder. Some of these faces we can't even make out, right? And they don't all seem, while they're in some kind of rows, they don't all seem to be placed in just the right spot in just the right way. Take a look at these aspects of postmodernism. First of all, it was created in response to World War II, 1940-ish and on. And the fact that it has the word post in its name is important. Post, the prefix meaning after. This is after modernism, but at the same time, modernism is in the title. And so postmodernism and modernism are two sides of a coin. They are closely related. Postmodernism, though, really is about this idea of no objective truth. There is not one true telling of the history of humankind, for example. There is no one truth of anything, for that matter. Everything is based on how you see it, from what point of view you see it, and a myriad of other aspects. So subjectivity over objectivity. The famous piece that really explains postmodernism is Francois Lyotard's Postmodern Condition, a Report on Knowledge from 1979, published in Quebec, Canada. And in it, he says that postmodernists have an incredulity toward meta-narratives. Incredulity, meaning they don't believe it. They don't think it's credible. Meta-narratives, meaning big stories. What are some of these big stories? Well, the idea that humanity is progressing, that we're getting better. That's a big story, and some people, or a lot of people believe that, right? That's part of how we function. we're leaving the world better than we came into it. We're making a little bit of progress as we go. Postmodernists said, well, why do we think that's true? How could that be true? They're questioning, or they're looking at the credibility of these big stories and really kind of picking them apart. Fragmentation and pluralism, so the idea that we need more stories, more viewpoints, and that they don't all connect necessarily. Sometimes they're fragmented, and this will become the case in the things they carried with the timeline. There's a loss of faith in human reason. It hasn't really helped us a whole heck of a lot, postmodernists are saying. And so maybe that's not what we want to look to. In literature, collage, chance, anarchy, and repetition are infinitely more interesting than just one subject. Pastiche and parody, where you're making fun of or using what's already been done in the past and trying to recreate something in the same vein, are important. The absurd, the anti-hero, magical realism are all important qualities of postmodernist literature. The key is that we're challenging audiences. We're not telling a story that's going to make the world seem okay. Instead, we're challenging their understanding of the world and challenging the reader's notion of things being okay. And so typically postmodernists will try to mess with us a little bit, and we will feel a little unsettled as we're reading it. They're asking questions rather than offering answers, like what is art and what is truth? Can a narrator be believed? We have unreliable narrators in postmodernism. We have those in modernism too, but in postmodernism, it goes beyond just an unreliable narrator, and there's this idea that there never could be a reliable narrator, that something like that does not actually exist. Authenticity is a lie. If anyone says they have the truth, question that. And then a blurring of the line between high and low art and commerce. So as far as examples, Beloved by Toni Morrison is a good example of a postmodernist text. Of course, the book we're reading now, Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Think questioning, challenging, and you'll see how this all works out as we read the book. Thanks for listening and taking